What's up, cooks? Welcome to the Card Kitchen. I am the Card Chef, and today we are doing the top 10 decks of the week. The Arceus Day tournament just completed as of today, and we are going to be looking at the last week of meta tournaments and all the decks that have done pretty well this week. And of course, we're going to be looking at decks with a 50% win rate or higher, and decks that have at least a 1% or a higher meta share. And so let's get into it. There's no very specific order. They are kind of in order, but some decks could be ranked higher in certain lists by other people. I just kind of chose it in this way. And the first deck we are going to look at is this Executor EX Arceus EX deck, and it's using the Carnivine with the Power Link. First of all, I think this deck is actually super good. The way it's built in general is just really good. 2 Executor EX lines, 2 Arceus EX, and 2 Carnivine. So we do have 6 basics and then 2 evolution lines, 2 being the exact same Pokemon, the Executor EX. We are playing Erika's and Giant Capes, which is super duper good in the meta right now because you do want to be able to get a ton of HP, more HP on your Pokemon as you possibly can. And most decks that are being very successful right now have some type of healing factor going on, whether it be Erika, Irida, just potions, or Adamant, something like that in general to keep your big bulky Pokemon online for as long as you possibly can. And then we're playing obviously 2 Professor's Research, 2 Pokeball. They don't really need to be mentioned. But then we're playing 2 Leaf, and I love the 1 Cyrus, 1 Sabrina split. But the reason why this deck is actually really good is because it doesn't only have a super duper good early game, but has a tremendous end game as well. Whether you go first or second, it doesn't really matter in this deck, because if you go first, you can start with an Executor or an Execute, and then by turn 2, you can evolve into your Executor EX and start attacking for 1 energy right away. If you go second, well, then you get to start with your Carnivine and start attacking in for 50 damage as long as you have an Arceus EX on your bench, which means no matter what, for 1 energy, whether you're going first or second, you get to start attacking in for super duper good early game damage. Like I said, Carnivine can do 50 damage for 1 energy as long as you have an Arceus EX on the bench. And if you go second, you get to start with your Executor EX and start attacking in anywhere between 40 to 80 damage for just 1 energy. And then after that, every single turn after that, you can start focusing on putting all of your energies on Arceus EX to get that 1 big 130 damage from your Arceus EX in the end game. So you have a super duper good aggressive early game and a really good strong end game with your Arceus EX. And not only that, but because we're playing a Cyrus and Sabrina split, you can get an early game Sabrina, knock something out with either your Executor EX or Carnivine, and then in the end, after you've done some damage with your Executor or your Carnivine, because it is low damage, even though it's aggressive damage, once they retreat, in the end game, when you finally have an Arceus EX completely fully loaded up with 3 energy, you can just Cyrus something back out and then win the game. So this deck is super good. The only thing I would maybe make one change in this deck specifically is because we're playing 2 Leaf, which is very important because Arceus EX and Executor EX are very high retreat costs when you consider it higher than 1. But what I would like to see is another split like the Cyrus and Sabrina for 1 X speed and 1 Leaf, so that in your first and or second turn, depending on whether you go first or second, you can get out the right Pokemon you want, that being either Carnivine and or Executor EX into the front early on, so that you can get the right Pokemon you need to start attacking right away for the most damage. But anyways, let's get into the next deck, and it's going to be the Magnezone Darkrai deck. This deck is still doing very good. It has been doing good since even before Triumphant Light. It was one of the best decks, if not the best deck in the game before Triumphant Light. It's still doing very good. The only thing about this deck And I think decks in the meta right now in general need to have a couple of things, whether it's ramp, a huge healing factor, or an aggressive attack, or a really crazy end game sweeper. I think this deck covers a couple of those things, but one issue I do have with this deck, because the win rate has dropped significantly, even though I do still think it's very, very good. The one thing this deck suffers from, I think, is just it's playing too many Pokemon, to be honest. Like, I think decks right now, the most successful ones, play the least amount of Pokemon opposed to decks that don't. But of course, this deck is still very good. You're able to have either or Kangaskhan and you either have a Druddigon or a Kangaskhan to start the game off in the active spot as your tanks. Your Druddigon will allow you to just get a bunch of breakpoints in for free, essentially, as long as your opponent is actually attacking in to your Druddigon. And even if you don't have the Druddigon, well, now you have a Kangaskhan who can do actually more damage than a Druddigon would, because you can attack for anywhere between 30 to 60 damage. And yes, there's times where you'll get 0 damage, but what you can also do, because this deck is playing a split between Rocky Helmet and Giant Cape, you can actually just take that Rocky Helmet, put it onto your Kangaskhan, turn it into a Druddigon, and then also attack with 1 energy. And then after that, you basically, again, just like the deck we saw before, once you put 1 energy on your Kangaskhan, the rest of the energy you start to focus on putting on to your Darkrai, and then you slowly build up at the same time as you're putting energy on your Darkrai. Your Magneton in the back row is also building free energy for your Magnezone as well. So by the time you get pretty much a Darkrai setup with 3 energy, you also have 3 energy on your Magneton, who then can evolve into Magnezone. So you have 2 Pokemon fully loaded up, while you've been getting free damage from either one, your Druddigon or your Kangaskhan, with a Rocky Helmet, and potentially even some attacks in for 1 energy. So this deck is still very good. And not only that, but by the time you get your Darkrai fully loaded up with 3 Dark Energy, you've also gotten 60 damage worth of free damage as well, because every time you attach a Dark Energy to your Darkrai, again, you're doing 20 damage to the opponent's active Pokemon. So I still think this deck is very, very good, and is considered a top 10 deck in my opinion. The next deck, another Darkrai deck, doesn't get as much love from the community, I don't think, anymore. But it did the week prior to this win the Ursi Day tournament, I believe it was. It was one of the bigger tournaments anyways, even if it wasn't that one. But this deck is still very good. And so, of course, what you want to be trying to do, even though this version that we're looking at right now isn't playing the Dawn, and I think maybe people have just decided that, you know what, the Dawn actually isn't all that necessary. Yes, it does have a tremendous ton of value, because what you can do is you can put a energy on your Darkrai, get 20 damage on to your opponent's active Pokemon, evolve into your Weavile as long as your Sneasel is in the active spot, and then don one of the energy from your Darkrai that just got 20 free damage on your opponent's active Pokemon onto your Weavile EX, and then your Weavile EX will be able to do I believe it's 70 damage. So you basically done 90 damage for 1 energy in your first turn of evolving into Weavile. This deck isn't playing that, but what it is doing is it's playing 3 Gust cards, which is actually completely insane, because when you get to do that, you basically control the game, right? Because if you're doing a ton of damage with your Weavile, so if you're getting 90 or 70 damage from your Weavile, because of Darkrai and Weavile comboing together, there's going to be a lot of retreats. So that's what people have to try to remember, is when you're doing these like mid-range attacks, like 90, 70, whatever they may be, you're going to force a lot of retreats. And the more retreats your opponent does, the more Cyruses or Sabrinas you will need to use. But if you don't play enough, your opponent will be able to retreat enough times to be able to stop you from getting those price points. So this is probably one of those really strong things that you are trying to do. Again, this deck of playing 2 Giant Capes in 1 potion, it is very important because there is a lot of grass still in the meta. Executor EX, Carnivine we already looked at, Leafeon Celebi is still played a lot and is still a very strong deck. It will not make the top 10 list because it has less than a 50% win rate, but there is a lot of grass in the meta. And so this is probably why this opponent, this person who made this deck, and what a lot of decks are doing is playing one copy of Mars. And the one reason why people like to play Mars is because if your opponent does knock out one of your EX Pokemon, you cannot risk your other Pokemon from getting knocked out. So what you need to do is play a Mars when you think they're going to Cyrus your Pokemon out that you want to retreat, because once you do that, you decrease the chance of them having the Cyrus in their hand. So this is why Mars in the late game is super duper important for decks like this. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into the next deck, and it's the Arceus Druddigon Greninja deck. This deck is it's pretty cool. It's basically very similar to the Gyarados Greninja deck, except that you're playing Arceus over the Gyarados. I think this deck is obviously the better version of those two decks, and then playing the one Heatran just makes sense. First of all, you have the room because you've already removed two Magikarp and two Gyarados, so now you've let yourself, by playing two Arceus, you can play one Heatran and then open the deck up to one extra card that you can fill into the deck. So I do think this deck is really cool, really interesting build, and now you're also able to play both water and fire energy in this deck, so that every single Pokemon you play in this deck actually has the ability to attack. So that is something that I really like about this deck. And Arceus, just in general, as a 3 energy attacker, to have almost a guaranteed, most often 130 attack is really decent, to be completely honest. It has no real drawback except for the fact that you need a full bench, but that is basically fixed by the fact that you're playing two Arceus, two Druddigon, two Froakie, and one Heatran. So you're playing 7 basics, which I do like the fact that we're playing 7 basics. Feels very similar to the old Pikachu builds, considering it has a very similar attack to the original Pikachu EX. But anyways, let's move on. Excuse me, I had a throat issue. This next deck, Gallade EX, this is one of those things that I was just talking about in the meta that we really need to be able to play a meta deck. There's a couple of things I have on my checklist that any one deck needs, and one of those things is a late game sweeper. Gallade EX fits that check mark on one of those check marks on my list as a endgame sweeper, because there are a lot of cards in the game right now, Pokemon that is, that have a lot of energy requirement to attack. Palkia EX takes 4. Yes, it does discard 3, but it does take 4. Dialga EX takes 4. Cards like Arceus take 3, and there's the Darkrai takes 3, Magnezone takes 3. There's a lot of cards that require a lot of energy to attack right now in the meta. So you are able to play Gallade EX a lot of the time and feel comfortable doing it. It also has 170 HP. So as long as it attacks first and gets a knockout, it will be more than likely is going to be able to take a shot and then sweep the game on the next turn for the next Pokemon is attacking into anyways. So this deck is very good, and I do love the fighting decks regardless of which one it is, because you're able to play some type of toolbox deck. Toolbox package, which is, in this case, they're playing Hitmonlee and Marshadow. They're playing 2 Hitmonlee and 1 Marshadow. I think I would still be playing 1 Sudowoodo and 1 Hitmonlee and 1 Marshadow instead, because you do just want that option. That's the whole point of a fighting toolbox, or toolboxes in general, is that you have things in your toolbox to answer anything that you might be coming up to in the tournaments that you're playing in, or on ladder that you're playing on. And considering we're going to be going into rank, I think that's a really important thing that you want to be able to do when you're going into those games, because you don't know exactly what you're going to be running into. But the one advantage fight and toolbox decks have is that they have answers to almost anything that they need to answer when going on to a ladder or into a tournament. But let's get into the next deck, we're going to be seeing a couple of water decks. They're all very similar in a sense, but this is the first one we're going to look at. I actually think this is one of the better versions. It doesn't have the best win rate, but I do like the versatility of this deck over a lot of other decks. So 2 Palkia Origin Form, 2 Palkia EX, and 2 Manaphy. Of course, it's a water deck, so we're playing 2 Misty, 2 Irida. We're playing 2 Giant Cape, which is, of course, you want to play in a deck like this when you're able to heal, because again, this is one of those checkmark things too. To be able to play a deck right now, you need to be able to have these types of things in your deck, either heal in, and late game sweeper, super aggressive deck, and or I forget the other one I said before, but anyways, this one plays Irida and Giant Capes, which is very necessary. And it helps this deck out a ton because you're able to just wrap a ton of energy onto both of your Palkias. And then once they're loaded up, you don't care about Vaporeon anymore. You do a huge attack with Palkia EX. You knock out one Pokemon, most likely a Pokemon EX. You retreat it. You bring out the Palkia Origin Form. And then you're also playing a Sabrina and a Cyrus. So now you have the ability to basically gust something out that you're most likely going to be able to knock out with either 60 or 120 damage when your Palkia flips for that damage. So a very, very good deck, has a very good win rate. But then we have the Articuno EX, which who would have known when this deck first came out? People were talking about it and people were super on the fence, like, is it a good deck, is it a bad deck? Now it's one of the best decks in the game. I think it's like ranked like 3rd on the Play TCG Limitless deck lists right now overall, with the play rate and win rate kind of combined together. And of course, I say this all the time every time I make a video like this, is the more trainers that come out in the game, the better 18 trainer decks are going to get. And so what I think we're going to need to see in the future are cards that actually help decks that play a lot of Pokemon, whether it's like things like Rare Candy or things that just in general that help get into evolution Pokemon more or evolve quicker. Because if the game just continues to go like this, all you're ever going to see is 18 trainer decks, and it's going to be a very boring game and a very boring meta. But of course, this deck gets to play basically every single thing it wants to in the deck. It's a water deck, so 2 Misty, 2 Irida, 2 Capes, and 2 Potions. This card will be very hard to knock out because of that. They are playing 1 red card, which is kind of interesting because I think I would have chosen a Mars, but that's just me because of the reason I said before. In the late game, you really don't want to get Cyrus'd out, but at the same time, you might want to use the red card early and also play a supporter at the same time, because if you lose your first Articuno, your second one's already in the active, so it might not get Cyrus'd out anyways. And then because we're only playing 2 cards, of course we're playing 2 Sabrina and 2 Cyrus, right? Because why not? We're playing 4 Gust cards because we want to be able to control the game as much as possible, and we have the ability to do that. But let's get into the next deck, and of course it's Palkia EX 18 trainer instead. So there is a bit, they are very close, but this has a little bit higher of a meta win rate, but less of a meta share, and that could be due to a couple of reasons. One, a lot more people might have the Articuno because it's from an older set, and or it could just be because people think it's more consistent because it only takes 3 energy and it also doesn't discard any energy. But anyways, this deck is basically the exact same deck. The only real difference is I think we're playing 2 Rocky Helmet and 1 Cape instead of 2 Cape and 1 Rocky Helmet. This deck is playing a Giovanni instead of a red card, so it is trying to find breakpoints because 150 might miss a breakpoint, but because you have a Giovanni, you're able to get that 160 that can knock out things like Executor EX. So probably very important in this deck. And then we're going to get into what I actually think is the best deck, but it's not currently shown as one of the better decks. But this deck actually also just won this week's Ursi Day tournament that won this morning, or this tonight is what I'm trying to say. And of course, it's the Rampardos Riolu deck. Rampardos, and this is again one of those things why I'm saying in the current meta there's a certain criteria that one deck needs to meet, and it's one of these is in a super duper aggressive deck. This deck is super aggressive because it can be very aggressive at the beginning with Sudowoodo, attacking into any type of EX Pokemon. You can also evolve by your second turn into Craniodos. Forget Rampardos for a second. Craniodos does 50 damage for 1 energy. With a Lucario, it's doing 70, and that's even before you evolve into the Rampardos, which is super duper insane. If any of these things get knocked out, you have a Marshadow to follow up with, which does 100 damage. If your Lucario is on the evolved on the field, is doing 120. And then of course Rampardos does 130 for 1 damage. With Lucario, it's doing 150, with 2 of them 170. If we knock something out, great, we get probably 2 prize cards because we're probably attacking into a Pokemon EX. And even if we don't knock it out, whatever, we don't take the damage. And then guess what? We have 150 HP, which is super hard to knock out in one shot unless it's something like a Charizard or a Palkia EX. So, I mean, listen, and then even if it does knock us out, who cares? We just did 130 damage and then we get knocked out, but guess what? We give up 1 prize and then whatever we bring in knocks out the Pokemon that just knocked us out, and we most likely get 2 points anyway. So this deck, super duper strong and super duper good. And then the last deck is Dialga Arceus EX. I think this is by far considered the best deck in the game right now. I'm actually never been a fan or a huge fan of Dialga EX, to be completely honest. I always found by the time that you get whatever you want loaded up on the field, your Dialga ends up getting knocked out or really close to it, and then you retreat it, and then it just gets Cyrused out, and then you're 2 prizes down. But because you can ramp, if you get those games where you've ramped once into an Arceus and once into a Mew, or once into another Dialga, you're basically set up for the rest of the game, because then you can just manually attach to whatever those Pokemon that we just talked about going forward to fill the rest of their energy requirement. And then you have a ton of Pokemon loaded up, whereas your opponent might only have 1. And then once you knock your opponent's first Pokemon out with all those energy, you have 3 other Pokemon that are pretty close to being fully loaded, whereas they have 0. This deck has a couple of different versions. One where we're playing the Shaman that we see on the board, or on the screen right now, which does healing. There's also decks that play the new Shaman that allows all your basics to have free retreat. This deck again is all basics, so that's why we would be playing the other Shaman, and it's only 6 Pokemon, so you get to play a lot of trainers, similarly to an 18 trainer deck. We are playing 2 Leaf because the Dialga and the Arceus both have 2 retreat requirement. Again, the one Sabrina split, the 1 Helmet, 1 Cape split, and we are playing a Mars for late games so we don't get Cyrused out. We're playing potions and a Cape because we want to be able to heal alongside our Shaman, and then 1 Giovanni to hit breakpoints. Again, the one thing I would probably do is play something like a maybe 1 X speed instead of 2 Leafs, and then have that 1 X speed 1 Leaf split, like we have a split for Cyrus and Sabrina and a split for Rocky Helmet and Cape. This deck allows, because we play again minimal Pokemon, the ability to play a lot of different trainer options, which is what the meta looks like right now. But anyways, with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Like, subscribe, and share. Join my Discord and my Twitter. And as always, keep cooking.